Um, Today we are here to go over Dream Lovers, the gamification of relationships. I did not know how to explain this well because I could not get the book until now we can, I guess. I guess I could have
told me.
I could have pushed for a bootleg or something, but I don't like doing that. However, I'm very excited that the MEP is hosting Alfie Bown today, and you didn't come to hear me introduce him, you came to hear him. So Alfie, take the Zoom floor away.
Great. Yeah, no, it's really, really nice to meet you, like I said, and, to anyone here and also listening, please do just find me and increase our network, because it's lovely to hear about MEP, and it sounds like a great project. And like I said, I'll be in New York soon. And also these days, you don't need to be in the same place to work together. So do find me and stuff. So, all right, I'll tell the story of my book, I guess. But in a way, it is a book for the left and a book for Marxists, but it doesn't engage in such a direct way with Marxism. But basically, I'll start by just describing the book and telling you what it's all about, and then see if anyone wants to ask questions about it and so on. So basically, a fun way of getting into it would be to say that in some ways this book is the story of my divorce. So after I separated from my wife, I decided I had for a long time before that studied psychoanalysis. I did my PhDs in psychoanalysis, and I've written some books in psychoanalysis, and really I was working on psychoanalysis and digital media. So I've done a book on psychoanalysis and video games, and a book on sort of meme culture. So since I was, for the first time in many years, found myself sort of single, I thought what I would do is to try and kind of really explore some of the weirdest parts, let's say, of the digital world in the realm of love and relationships. So I looked at things like, starting from the obvious, online dating platforms and apps, and going to the weirdest and most wonderful stuff, such as smart condoms, which are a kind of digital condom that you can use to sort of monitor and regulate your sexual performances and so on. Sex robots. I visited a sex bot brothel, in fact, in Europe. And also really importantly, virtual reality and AI sort of substitute partners. So virtual reality girlfriends, boyfriends, dating simulators, and all sorts of strange things. So this whole realm of things, which basically is what we could call the kind of love or relationship industries, right? So this kind of massive, strange, sprawling network of new technologies which are to do with relationships and love and desire and things like that, and to try and kind of explore that. Another kind of starting point, which is much less personal, I suppose, is to think that, one of my main interests in why psychoanalysis is the ally of the left, let's say, or of Marxism, and I've always really worked in this area, that why should psychoanalysis help and assist Marxist agendas or socialist agendas, or generally speaking, a left agenda or a progressive agenda, and my sort of feeling, my consistent feeling behind that is that it's an understanding of desire and an understanding of fantasy. I suppose those are the two things I would say, and those are obviously not the same, but they are connected. So thinking about psychoanalysis as something which helps us understand fantasy and helps us understand desire. And those, to me, seem to be critical kind of components of how contemporary digital, particularly digital capitalism, functions. So, if we're to understand how we relate to, your Elon Musks or your sex robots, or basically, you name it, video games, whatever, anything that you can really name from the world of tech, if you're to understand how we relate to those things, you've got to understand desire and you've got to understand fantasy. And so my idea was to look at these developments, or latest developments, I suppose we should say, in platform capitalism, in digital capitalism, and to think about how we are being transformed at the level of desire and whom we're being transformed for. So the sort of political or the politics of the project is to explore how capitalism, and this is obviously where the Marxism is, how capitalism contributes to a sort of transformation of the worker, of the subject, of the citizen, however you want to look at it, and how it transforms us into a sort of worker of its own, in its own service. And then from the psychoanalytic perspective, to think about us as desiring, enjoying subjects who live and take pleasure in the world, and to how do these two things kind of connect to turn us into the sort of subjects of platform capitalism, let's say, which is a term from a book I really recommend by Nick Cernacek, called Platform Capitalism. So when this really started for me, and I think there's one story which is a great way of sort of talking about this book, really, just a personal anecdote, really. I was doing a visiting professorship in a fantastic city called Hangzhou, which is in East China. It's right on the coast, not so far from Shanghai. And this is one of the most traditional and oldest cities in China. So it's got all of this beautiful architecture, those kinds of pagodas and boats that you imagine when you sort of close your eyes and think of kind of historic ancient China. But crucially, it's also the place where Alibaba has its headquarters and where it began, which is obviously, it's the second biggest, in fact, after Tencent, who own WeChat, tech corporation in China. I was there actually at the China Academy of Art giving this kind of talk. And my talk was actually about WeChat, as an app which was to do with kind of surveillance culture and so on. So I was basically there slagging off this company, saying how bad and dystopian the world of Tencent is. And at the end of this talk, a couple of people approached me and said they were lawyers. And I thought, oh, shit, I'm going to get myself in some trouble or something. And they said, oh, we're from Alibaba. And I thought, okay, it's interesting. At least they're not from Tencent. And they said, well, they said, well, you hate Tencent, don't you? And I was like, yeah, I do, yeah. And they said, well, you probably love us. We're their enemies. And I sort of said, no, I'm against all of you. You're all evil. And then they were like laughing and saying, well, why don't you come with us on this trip to our headquarters called Cloud Town, which is in the outskirts of Hangzhou in East China. And of course I didn't want to, I was totally honest with them. I said, listen, I'm not here to I'm just going to write some articles in the Guardian about how evil you are, right? And they were like, no, don't worry. We're not worried. We're taking you there, which again, I suppose shows how little they care about sort of liberal journalism or something. But in any case, I decided to go and have a look. And it was extremely interesting, the sort of stuff they showed me. It was also extremely predictable. It looked like something from that HBO comedy Silicon Valley. It was just like loads of bean bags and like loads of empty space with just a few nerds working on computers. But they were sort of taking me around. They were showing me all these technologies, and lots of it was very, very illuminating. They showed me these traffic lights which can tell how many wrinkles you've got underneath your eyes, and then they decide how long you will take to cross a road based on your age. And so you get a green light for longer if you're more wrinkly and so on. And they showed me all these things. But the thing that they were most proud of was this car, right? And this car is a joint project from I think it's a German car manufacturer called Rover, and we have those cars in the UK, or we used to in the 90s, and Alibaba, and they sort of showed me this car, and it just looked like a normal car, and they were telling me it's got a drone that follows it round or whatever, all this stuff. And I said to the guy who was showing me around, what's the most impressive, important thing about this car? And I was expecting him to say, it drives itself, it can fly, it's the car that can never crash, or look, it looks really cool, or it's got like, you know, movies in it, you know. But he said no. What he said was, this car, it knows when you're hungry and what you might want to eat before you do, and it tells you to eat it. And at the time, I thought like very little of this. I just kind of moved on with my life and thought, what nonsense. But later, when I started thinking about it and started looking into it a bit more, I realized that actually this is the most dystopian and powerful feature of this car, and this is a really indicative of the kinds of technology that's happening. Because what this car does, essentially, it syncs with your smartphone or with your internet history. And you might not realize that, you know, at 5:30 on a Tuesday afternoon, you really fancy, let's say, fried chicken, whatever. And but the car realizes that. And at 4:45 or, you know, 5:15, it says to you, why don't you go and get this fried chicken that you want? And I'll even drive you there, you know. I'm a nice car. And so it just changes people's patterns of movement slightly. And I asked the guy when I was there in Hangzhou, why does that matter? Why do you want to do that? And he basically said, because we can redirect people from places which take cash or places which you can pay by WeChat Pay, which is Tencent's version of the payment method. And we can direct you instead to places that take Alipay, which is their own payment method. So, you know, not in itself that scary, I suppose, from a sort of Marxist perspective, let's say, because all it is a corporation trying to drive traffic away from one type of payment to another in order to benefit its own corporation. So it's not in that sense any different to a normal piece of advertising, right? Coca-Cola tries to direct you away from Pepsi or whatever. But what is different about this example, and it's kind of at the heart of my book, is the relationship between the subject, ourselves, and desire in this future of capitalism, which is kind of imagined by these kind of tech corporations who plan the future of the sort of capitalist city. So what they're doing essentially at the heart of here is that what is called predictive technology in the speak of tech bros is not in fact predictive, but well, it's not only predictive. It predicts what you might want, and then it nudges you. And actually in Facebook boardrooms and in social media boardrooms, this is a common phrase. It's a term used to describe moving people in certain directions using algorithms and prediction technologies, basically data, called nudging, right? So nudging is really important here. So what I wanted to do was kind of take this idea that you're being nudged by your desire and through your desire. So platforms like Facebook, platforms like Spotify, the music platform, corporations like Alibaba, what they're doing is they are telling you that we are working out what you want and giving it to you. But what they're actually doing is working out what you want and nudging you to want something slightly different. Right, so you could see this in simple ways with a program like Pokemon Go. I'm sure none of you played, but you know, a kind of mobile phone augmented reality app from 2016. Franco Bifo Berardi called summer 2016 the summer of Pokemon Go, when everyone was just running around the streets catching these Pokemon. But there was some, if you look in any detail at that, you can see some interesting kind of deals between where they would place the Pokemon, and McDonald's had a deal with this Pokestops, and where I was playing at the time, I was living in Hong Kong at the time, only the rarest Pokemon only existed, good some people played, the rarest Pokemon in Hong Kong only existed in the most expensive shopping mall. So, and don't forget that important here is that Niantic, the company who built the game, were bought before that by Google. So really what you're looking at here is a kind of platform capitalist project involving companies from Google, but also way further down, which tries to replan Alibaba, Google, whichever you want to pick, which tries to replan the way desire functions in the digital city, in the smart city of the future. So what you're looking at is a kind of a network of huge, powerful corporations who have their own different reasons for influencing desire. But the technologies they build try to sort of nudge desire in a way which is helpful to their particular agenda. So in a sense, the whole myth which we are sold by tech propaganda and by most of the media, that the technology is a means to get what you want, or a mechanism which helps you get what you want, is kind of false. And what's actually happening is a kind of revolution in desire itself. So what it means to desire in the age of the internet, in the age of apps, in the age of Pokemon Go, in the age of Deliveroo, Uber Eats, whatever, what it means to desire in this era is actually different, and it's being remapped and replanned to suit kind of particular agendas. And the example I just gave is a specifically corporate one of companies like wanting to drive more traffic to, let's say, McDonald's, or companies wanting to drive traffic to, let's say, Alibaba's income through Alipay. But if you look at companies like Cambridge Analytica and Palantir, who are basically these, well, I mean, I'm sure you all know Cambridge Analytica is, but, Palantir is kind of major. Well, it's got lots. It's made up of lots of ex-army and ex-NSA people who basically sell a kind of democracy rigging service to different nations, states, and so on. So you can employ the company to kind of use data. It's data-driven solutions to political problems used to be Palantir's kind of headline, right? So what they would do is they influenced an election in Iran, for example. The Brexit election in the UK famously used the company Cambridge Analytica, and they used the same kind of tactics that you see Google and Alibaba using. They don't use some sort of mad election rigging, tactics that you've never heard of. They use the same fundamental principles of the major tech corporations like Google, Microsoft, whatever you might think of, and that's in China, in the West, and everywhere else. So what you're looking at is a small number of powerful actors, be they state or corporate or whatever, being able to sort of use these brand new data-driven and desire-driven platforms to sort of manipulate the sort of will of people in a way that is completely unprecedented. So in order to understand desire today, you also need to be able to think about how technology kind of mediates and influences it. And this is one of the reasons why I wanted to sort of plug this kind of critique of contemporary capitalism in with psychoanalysis. Because in many ways, psychoanalysis, obviously, the famous psychoanalytic ideas of, say, Freud and Jacques Lacan are not outdated, I wouldn't say, but they apply to a different period of time to the one which we're currently living in a way that Marx's ideas probably aren't outdated. But what I wanted to sort of look at or claim, I suppose, was that because of this change in the way we desire, because desire isn't our own anymore, and probably it never was, the things we desire are political, they are not instinctual, not private, but they are social, cultural, political, and now we can add technological into this kind of mix, really, and start to say that, well, the way in which desire is changing in this contemporary moment, this particular moment of, let's say, contemporary or technological capitalism, this is a sort of almost a fundamental shift. It's not a fundamental shift in society, but it's a fundamentally new tactic that capitalism uses to manipulate and change desire to sort of suit its contemporary agenda and so on. So this was my kind of way of thinking in this book, really, and so to look at how to tackle this problem, how to understand the way in which what we want cannot be a route to liberation. And from a perspective of socialism or Marxism or the left, one can also see this is important to think about, because we can't simply say that we want to escape, or that or that this contemporary world, in whatever way, however we choose to describe it, we can't say it limits or prevents us from being free or from getting what we want, because the very means of this society existing is by manipulating and changing what we want. So how do we, as socialists or Marxists or as a left or progressives, whatever you prefer to think of yourself as, how do we rebel when our desires are the most co-opted part of our oppression, let's say, or our so if to think about it in Marxist terms, if the working population, if the proletariat is mostly co-opted and defined by its desires, how to liberate or free a community of people, a group of people, or a social structure of people, when the last thing you can trust is your own desires, right? And this is the world we live in now, and why it's so difficult to build alternatives to capitalism. And I find the work of Mark Fisher kind of important in this, but also just in general thinking about where the left is, politically. And I'm sure, like many others, there was a period right during the middle of writing this book where, through Bernie Sanders and through Corbyn, perhaps to a lesser extent through Mélenchon, it felt like the left would have a platform for kind of reformation of society within politics, that desire was kind of working for the left in a certain way. But I mean, on the other hand, the right seems to have this knack of harnessing desire. If you look at the Trump elections and the Trump's popularity in general, but also with the Brexit issue here, and to a lesser extent with the COVID situation, with lockdowns, and a lot of the pleasure that goes on in politics is really sort of successfully harnessed by the right, or perhaps we could even, I don't know, by the right, I'd say. Why I wanted to also ask this question of why is it that the left seems unable to sort of activate people at the level of desire, whereas the right seems so successful and able to get people to enjoy. And you could just see the sort of libidinal pleasure in somebody like Boris Johnson over in the UK, or Trump, or even Marine Le Pen, does not compare at all to, I mean, maybe Jeremy Corbyn could be a kind of outlier example, but with Bernie and with Corbyn, there was almost this kind of ironic pleasure taken in, for example, this football chant, "Oh, Jeremy Corbyn," which was kind of popular in the UK because it was mocking the idea that football fans we might back Jeremy Corbyn in the same aesthetic style that we would back a football team. But there's a long history, I'd say, of the right being able to sort of manipulate desire and manipulate pleasure and emotion more successfully than the left. Okay, so this is all a roundabout way of saying that one of the things I wanted to sort of attack was this question, really, of what do we do when desire is the most co-opted and least trustworthy thing about us. So if and this is a psychoanalytic thing, if the last thing you can trust is your desires, then how do you sort of rebel against the system that you're in? So I wanted to sort of think about that in the book. Okay, so what I kind of playfully concluded, I mean, I should maybe mention some of the things I looked into. I mean, some of the fun stuff I'm sort of leaving out. I looked at technologies themselves, like doing can I speak slower? Yeah, I can. Is the internet connection all fine and everything?
It's very good.
Yeah, I always speak extremely fast, and the more sort of happy and excited I get, the faster I talk. That's just my way. But I will try and speak slower. Yeah.
But Alfie, we're recording so people can listen again.
Yeah. No, it's just my normal pace of speech, but okay. I will try and speak slow. So yeah. So that's just sort of sketching out this kind of situation, I suppose, with the way in which this book kind of emerges from a frustration with the left and this question of desire, I suppose. With this is really the point in a nutshell. The question of how to in fact, this question of speaking slower is also part of libidinal pleasure and so on. Why can't the left speak slower, I suppose? But in order to sort of activate desire, what could we do? And I suppose one of the things that I sort of wanted to be clear about in my sort of proposals in this book, and because in the book I sort of, and it's partly a joke, I have to say, but each chapter, so I've got a chapter on, wait, what are they? One's on the smart city, which is the stuff I've really talked about with Alibaba and this kind of network of planned citizens that Google organizes and sends you where they want. One is about dating sites and the kind of algorithms and structures behind them, how we could think about that in terms of politics. Some of the weird things I looked at were things like Trump.dating, which is a dating site for Trump supporters, and the Atlasosphere, which is the Ayn Rand dating site. I don't know if you've ever heard of that, but there are some real bizarre people on there. But also, I'm sure you could get in communities like 4chan and 8chan, there are groups and threads which are based around flirting and dating, but with a particular kind of politics, and sometimes it borders on, I don't know, I'm not really one for calling things fascist, but these are a way in which the right has been able to use the world of dating really effectively to kind of pick up artistry, for example, has a long history of connection with right-wing politics and so on. So there is this kind of long history of how dating has been part of the right, which I think is kind of interesting, and also how dating is part of capitalism. One company owns almost all of the dating sites. I will come back to my point. This company, they're a New York company, I think, or are they in New Jersey? No, they're a New York company called IAC, and they've got a big building. It's white. It looks really ugly. It looks like a spaceship, and it looks across the water from Manhattan to New Jersey. You're probably near it, some of you. And they own the Match Group, so they own like Hinge, Bumble, Tinder, but they also own like more of the traditional older ones like OkCupid, Plenty of Fish, that sort of thing. This is extremely interesting, this story. The one that they didn't own is Grindr. It's one of the only dating sites that was independently owned, not owned by this group. And Grindr was actually bought by this kind of gaming company from China in 2016. And there's some great stuff about this by a journalist called Evan Moffat. I really recommend. He's like a gay journalist who writes about how Grindr anticipated augmented reality in a certain way, because people on this app were like meeting up for dates, having dinner together, or meeting up and having sex with each other and staying on the phone the whole time. And Grindr kind of rewards you with points for being on the phone at the time. You can get kind of credits. It's a real kind of gamified logic. So in a way, it isn't a surprise that a games company kind of bought this app from its creators. But I mean, this whole weird saga transpired with Donald Trump wanting it back. I don't know if you remember this in the media, but Trump really wanted he was extremely worried about Grindr being owned by China. So he tried to put pressure on China to sell Grindr back to an American company. Now, I mean, the irony of this is obscene, really, because you've got this kind of, homophobic president trying to pressure China, which has a terrible history of LGBTQ stuff, to sell back the gay dating app to America from China. So you've got these kind of two kind of homophobic kind of massive nation states fighting over a gay dating app. And in the end, Trump actually succeeded in forcing the sale with quite a lot of pressure. The saga lasted years, and Grindr now is owned by an American company again. Now, the reason why this happens is two reasons, really. One is that Grindr was part of the gamification of love. let's say. So what it was doing, and it's the thing it's famous for in the old days when it launched, was saying, look, there's a date 1 mile away from you, use the GPS system to get to them. When you get there, whatever, you get points for having a date or whatever. So it began to gamify desire. And this is, anyone who's been on Tinder or anyone who's been on the dating app in the last 5-10 years could see these same patterns as well. That part of the what's going on here is the gamification of relationships, the kind of transformation of relationships into something that can be kind of manipulated by these kind of tech platforms which mediate between the two people who are supposedly falling in love or whatever. But secondly, is the question of intimate data. So the reason why Trump wanted to pressure Jinping into letting this app be sold is because the data that we give to our dating apps is enormously valuable, right? And Trump was not Trump, but the American tech people, Eric Schmidt, who was CEO of Google. He works for the Pentagon and this kind of committee of people who advise the Pentagon how to integrate Google-like technologies into the NSA. So, these are the sorts of stakeholders in this kind of discussion. They were so worried that if China had access to the intimate data of gay people in the US, it would hand over enormous power to China. And of course to the corporations, more importantly to the corporations that exist behind that, right? So this national global battle for Grindr between two homophobes in two nations who didn't have a good reputation for this kind of thing, what it really shows is the extreme power of our technologies, our desires, and the way we relate to them, the way our desires plug into technology, and the value of our desire or our data, which betrays our desire and allows companies like Cambridge Analytica, Palantir, etc. to exist. So we're basically living in a new world of sex and love and relationships where, and this might sound kind of extreme, but in my view, we're living in a new kind of world of sex and love and relationships where only a small portion of that relationship is between the subject and object, between the person, the people that we're with, right? So much of it is to do with the mediating power of technology. And this is where sex robots and dating simulators and smart condoms and dating sites and everything else comes into it. That, and Facebook too, and Twitter and WhatsApp, messaging services. I mean, and this is not, and also I should say, this is not just for single people. If you might have been in a relationship for 10 years, 20 years, but now you've come in and come into the world of technology, and like 90% of your interactions if you're both busy parents or something with high-powered jobs or busy jobs, you're likely to interact enormously through WhatsApp and message through WhatsApp and send emojis and comments through WhatsApp. So, this is not just about lonely singles or gamers. This is one of the real things I wanted to say about this in this book, that this is not about gamers who are like nerds watching virtual reality pornography. And this is not about singles who are like going around on Tinder having, loads of dates and never settling down in a relationship. Like all of us, we're all in this together, like married people, grandparents, teenagers, singletons, couples. We're all in this together. And the media would have you believe that only a weirdo would go to a sex robot brothel. But I mean, perhaps that's true. But I mean, as a weirdo, I have been to one. But the point I'm making is we're all in this together. Like relationships, desires, and love and friendships are being totally transformed by the technologies which mediate between us and the things we desire. Right, and in the course of this, quite, as you've pointed out, quite rambling talk, I've talked about quite a lot of different kinds of, let's say, desire, right? Now I'll try and make a good point of it. I've talked about things like Pokemon, where you see a little Pikachu and you want to go and get it, and that's one kind of desire. And I've talked a bit about food, like, you see like some avocados on Instagram, and then you go to a restaurant or whatever, your self-driving car takes you there. I've also talked about like finding relationships or perhaps to a lesser extent finding sexual partners. And obviously these things are really different, right? Like food, Pokemon, sex, marriage. These are 4 extremely different things. But there are kind of similarities between the way in which we relate to these objects of desire in contemporary culture. And if you were, for example, to have a go tonight on Tinder, let's say, Pokemon Go, and Deliveroo, I don't know if you have Deliveroo in the US, or Uber Eats or whatever. If you were to have a go on those 3 things, let's say, or maybe we could add one that isn't strictly about sex, like Hinge. If you were to have a go on Hinge, Tinder, Uber Eats and Pokemon Go this evening, you would see, even with your own eyes and the interfaces, some striking similarities between the objects of desire that are offered to us by those apps, even though they are quite different things, right? And this is also something that Freud talks about. Like, say, a quick theoretical thing. Freud actually has this really interesting essay where he says that, the word love, the way we use that, we say, oh, I love my son, or I love my daughter, and we say, I love my wife, my husband, but we also say, I absolutely love Nike trainers, or I absolutely love Japanese ramen, right? And usually you find people separate these kinds of love. But Freud actually says something really interesting. He says that actually there's a connection between these things, and it's not an accident that we use the same word to apply to such different things. So the fact that we can say, I love football, right? I love Mars bars. I love my girlfriend, right? And I love trainers. The fact that we can speak in this way where we slip between these different things with the same word. Freud says this is not a coincidence, but a kind of clue how we can understand how sort of society functions and how desire functions in society. And I think that's right. I think that the similarities between the way we relate to our objects of desire is really important. And in a way, my sort of conclusion would be, or for today at least, is that we have handed over to digital capitalism an enormous amount of power. And this digital tech capitalist world which we live in, right? And I'm not saying Elon Musk and Mark Zuckerberg are sat there saying, let's do this. But, it almost inadvertently, what's happened is we have outsourced a huge portion of our desire to technology. So Netflix tells you what to watch. Spotify tells you what to listen to. Tinder tells you who to go out with. Uber Eats tells you what to eat. Grindr tells you who to have sex with. Pokemon Go tells you which streets to walk down to get to work. And I can, there are more examples and more examples and more examples. But what we are actually doing is outsourcing a portion of our decision making and outsourcing a portion of our desire to a kind of automated algorithmic world, which is essentially capitalism. So from a psychoanalytic perspective, we can see this happening. And I think from a Marxist perspective, we can object and say that we ought not to do that, because what's actually happening is we're becoming a new kind of desiring subject. We're becoming a new kind of citizen whose desires are partially programmed by the very people we want to overthrow, or we seek to overthrow, or whose power we seek to question. So this really is what this book is, and I know there's only a few of us here, so I don't want to sort of talk for an enormously long time. But I'll just sort of round off by saying what I just tried to do, as well as say these things, is propose some solutions to this, right? Which is, ways in which we might be able to transform this using technology. So I don't, and honestly, this will be the last sort of 3 or 4 minutes. I don't want us to, if I'm right in any way about any of this, I don't want us as socialists, whatever we are, Marxists, to opt out of technology and say that this is bad and that we should go back to the good old days of just randomly meeting people in bars or something. I think that would be a mistake, because there's no way that's going to happen. This technology is here to stay, and also because the most underprivileged people in the world will stay there. So if we go off grid, let's say, all of the people in the Philippines who depend on the grid for their existence and their livelihood will be left to fight the battle without us. So I think as the left, as Marxists, the best thing we can do is try to use this technology and kind of repurpose it. And a lot of what I've said today and in the book is really negative, I'd say, in the sense that, look, I'm saying this is how our desires are being controlled by corporate capitalism. But the fact that desire can be changed by corporate capitalism also means that desire can be changed by progressive leftists, let's say. So I think that there's a hopeful message in all of this, that if I'm right, that corporate capitalism, for want of a better word, platform capitalism, whatever, is transforming our desires and turning us into sort of perfect conformist subjects for a future of capitalism in which we have less and less power. If I'm right that that's happening, it means that we can also transform our desire for the better, right? That there is a possibility to reprogram and desire again, right, in a different way. And I think that this is the way to take this forward, is not to think, well, okay, I can't trust my desires anymore, so what do? I'm just useless now. I have to just be a lemming for Google. But no, instead to think that, well, since desire has been reprogrammed once, let's reprogram it again. So how can we use technologies? How can we use ourselves, our societies, our communities, in person, on Zoom, in the cafe, in Facebook, outside Facebook, whatever we have at our disposal, how can we use these things to repurpose and reprogram desire for a better, let's say, socialist, Marxist, leftist future, let's say, rather than taking it as a kind of hopeless thing. So I think that's about 40 minutes. I mean, that's probably long enough for you guys. And sorry to go fast and in a confusing and rambling way, but hopefully I was able to sort of tie these things together. And this is just the bunch of things I tried to sort of talk about in the book. And yeah, hopefully at least one or two of those were interesting to you guys. So thanks for listening.
Thank you, Alfie. It was a very good presentation. And so we'll take each question as they come in. Carol Ann.
Yes, thank you.
You have to speak up a little louder, Carol Ann.
Okay, are you able to hear me now?
I can.
Okay, very good. Absolutely outstanding. I was really looking forward to this presentation. So thank you so much for your great research, and I'm looking forward to getting my hands on the book. The question I have for you, and I apologize, I'm rambling a bit because I'm forming it as I'm, expressing it or asking it. So the question really starts at the beginning of your talk, and it's a question about failed desire. And I've just recently come across this so-called thing called the manosphere. And what I've noticed in Western Canada, in Vancouver, in Victoria, where I live, is this incredible rise of violence, male violence against women who've rejected men, whether through dating sites or these kind of, you go to places where I can't recall the word, but you kind of meet 8 or 10 people within a few minutes, right? So anyway, could you talk a little bit about how men have become, it's transactional, relationships have become transactional. And these sites that teach certain kinds of men how to manage failed desires, which is in a sense like they're entitled to access to a woman's body. And if they don't have that access, it's a failed transaction, which often results in tremendous violence. Like recently, a young woman, a 20-year-old woman, was killed because she rejected a man through the internet or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
But how that's being translated into community, at least here, it's escalated racial tensions. So it's being sort of packaged in a way that, oh, that's a South Asian, because there are South Asian people, it's related to honor killings, or it's Black and it's related to being outside the labor market. So it's really, really gripping our communities here in Western Canada in ways I haven't seen before. So, sorry, yeah, very, very long question to ask you more about failed desire. Thank you.
No, it's a great question, and I'm glad you asked it, because part of the book is also to investigate, I mean, look, okay, I'll tell you after the recording's finished. No, I'm really happy with the question, because part of what I wanted to do was explore these I would say niche pockets of the internet which are extremely right wing, and so I do write about men going their own way, which is part of this manosphere question, and this thing called SMV, and you pointed to it with this kind of question of value and the body and the sort of in this case the sort of female body and so on, and SMV is sexual market value. So there's these kind of communities who attribute certain values to people and so on, and it's extremely strange communities that I really wanted to kind of dig into, and also pickup artistry, which I think you were talking about, with these communities teaching men how to cope with desire. This, I think, is when I was at university, it was in 2004, 5, 6, and this famous book from 2000 called The Game was really in vogue in the UK. I think it's actually American, but I don't know how much it impacted things there. But basically, it was a set of pickup artists' tricks to pick up women and so on. And this experienced a sort of boom in British and European academia, and then retreated. But now you find it very much in this kind of bizarre. Yes, I think you're right to say often quite violent pockets of the internet, and the Venn diagram of this overlaps with 4chan and 8chan and the sort of Trump movement and so on. So there is this kind of problem with misogyny and so on, which is embedded in this kind of investigation into desire. So that part I'm with you, and I agree with, and I did try and kind of look into these. What I would say, which is potentially slightly more controversial, is that I don't actually think this is a right-wing problem. And I think that there's a great tendency in the liberal media to ostracize these kind of sub-communities by saying, well, just look at these, how they treat women on this forum, it's awful, and so on. And no doubt it is. But I think these problems are wider than that, and I think this is one of the things why I wanted to look at this kind of relationship between the desire and the right, is to say that I think it's mainstream capitalism which is turning desire into something dangerous, rather than, let's say, fascists or incel communities or pockets of or sub communities on Reddit and 4chan and so on. So I think I agree with you that this is a huge concern and it can give rise to real violence. But I think the cause of this ultimately is mainstream capitalist conceptions of desire, rather than weird subcultures that are flowing over into the mainstream, if that makes kind of sense. But it's not a great answer. It's a part of an answer.
Well, so I think it's a very important question, and that one will take some time to work out. Elizabeth, you're next on stack, and after you is Abdullah.
Okay, hi. Yeah, I think I'm out with my phone, so I'm sort of invisible, but can you hear me?
You get closer to your microphone, Elizabeth.
Yeah, can you hear me now?
I can hear you.
Okay.
Okay. Yeah, that's a wonderful talk. Very, very stimulating, and also thank you so much for that. And here I had just a couple questions to pose on that basis. First, I tend to wonder if by conceptualizing the desiring subject as a separate individual, we're not in a way leaving the field in which these atoms move around open to the power of corporate capital to basically infiltrate the field, while we're running around construing our desire as this little fount of energy within our own, fiefdom, our own little body with the perimeter of our skin. If you see what I'm saying, like a conceptualization of the subject as this isolated, desiring individual means that we may be missing the point that these forces of desire are in a way moving like waves through populations, through groups, and that the corporations, in their vast intelligence, are figuring out how to tap into these forces of desire that move through cultures and through whole, in a sort of a field theory of subjectivity as opposed to an atomistic theory of subjectivity. If this might not help us to be better prepared to combat this in some way. I don't know if I'm making myself clear, but for example, if you think back to early Freudian studies, where he was diagnosing these women as having this disease, hysteria, and then some people would go back later and say, wait a minute, these women were in a home environment where they were being sexually abused, and they were manifesting symptoms which expressed this problem that was functioning on a systemic basis and through their whole environment. Mm-hmm. And so he failed to recognize what was going on because he was diagnosing it as an individual malady. So maybe there would be a correlate to this in psychoanalysis. I mean, I don't know if maybe family systems theory starts to go that way or whatever, but it seems like just the whole concept. I mean, given individual liberties is the gift they gave us with these bourgeois regimes, so that we would be all happy to have these, freedoms that are accorded to the individual unit. But maybe it blinds us to the power that these vast international megalithic institutions now have to manipulate, the interstices.
Yeah.
And then just the second related point I want to say is, and I'm not a techie, so I don't know, but like, would there be anything emerging similar to, say, blockchain that would allow individuals to seal themselves off completely from information gathering and these algorithms? I mean, some sort of a technological fit. Okay. Thank you so much. I appreciate it.
Okay, yeah. No, someone was asking if I could repeat the question because they couldn't hear the audio, which I don't think I can do because it was quite long. But I do have some answers to. I can repeat the parts of it. I mean, it's difficult to. But I think I totally agree with you. My instinct is to say I agree with you totally. I think one thing. There were two things I'd pick out there. One was this question of whether. This way in which psychoanalysis treated individual symptoms as individual when they were actually systemic. I think that is absolutely critical question. And I just want to say I totally agree. And I think that this is also why I think Lacanian psychoanalysis is more interesting than other forms, because it tends to do the reverse of that, right? So people, in the Lacanian tradition or in some Anna Freud tradition, whatever, the most common. Yes, this problem exists in psychoanalysis where what are in fact systemic political problems are diagnosed as individual ones. What I think, and that I don't want to get into the people in psychoanalysis love to debate the hell out of this stuff, but what I think is important, and I think Lacan is saying this, but regardless of, I don't care who says it, what I think is important is exactly as you said. It's the other way around, thinking of individual impulses, problems, frustrations as systemic is much more important, right? So even with something with on a very casual level, something like desire, I want this. This is not actually you wanting it, but a sort of political system which is driving desire and so on. So I understand how you were connecting that to sort of tech companies and so on. But even with things like, if we can go to the big media grabbing headlines like school shootings or whatever, the desire to make this an individual problem is still extremely strong in the media, and really it has to be seen, if we're to treat it from the left, it has to be seen as a systemic problem. Like, it doesn't actually matter if this person was mad. What matters is what social and cultural, political conditions allowed this madness to manifest or whatever. So yes, in terms of like treating questions of violence, which the last question was also about, we very much need this anti-individual approach, which doesn't say, look at this incels, look at these weird little incels, or look at this guy who's got, schizophrenia or something. We very much need a kind of approach which says, well, in what way does this person's act of violence kind of relate to systemic problems in our society? That I totally agree with, and I would like to think that some kinds of psychoanalysis would be an ally of that way of thinking. The second question about Bitcoin, no, about the blockchain. Yeah, I mean, I found the blockchain exciting, but my answer, you were asking, is there examples of technologies? But the answer is there always are examples of technologies which could serve a leftist agenda. With the early internet, you saw it with the well, not the early internet, but the early 2000s. You saw this boom of the Creative Commons. You saw things like free software before it became co-opted by Google, Lawrence Lessig, Richard Stallman, these kind of internet activists. But, somebody like Aaron Swartz, if you think, who you may have seen that fantastic Netflix documentary, not that I'm okay with Netflix, but, the Internet's Own Boy. It's a brilliant documentary about Aaron Swartz, who, made Reddit and so on. This kind of pioneers who are using technology to do great things. The question, is there any technology which serves the left? My answer is this: all of it serves the left. Every time something new emerges, and this happened with the internet itself. We could see there was going to be a new kind of democracy. There was going to be a new Creative Commons. There was going to be new kinds of commune, new concepts of the commune, a world without surplus, without scarcity, sorry. And you could see it with the blockchain. Blockchain was a fantastic thing for the left that very, very quickly became co-opted by the capitalists. And, I'm talking fast again because I'm getting excited or whatever. But, NFTs, for example, for me, NFTs, which are currently obviously, well, are they even new news? They're old news already. But what is important about NFTs is it's an attempt to reintroduce scarcity into the digital commons that should be infinite. So, the digital commons, this digital space, it should have this revolutionary potential to be a gathering point for people from all over the world, where resources on there are not scarce, they're infinite, they can be reproduced. That was the quality of the digital, right? Whereas, water or gas will run out. So all of digital technology lends itself to support the left. The blockchain, the internet itself, the commons, whatever. But capitalism is dedicated to reintroducing scarcity, so that Facebook, Twitter, Google can have their share and so on. And NFTs will have to be purchased, and blockchain will just be used to trade Bitcoin and so on. So it's not that the technology isn't on our side. The technology is on our side, and it's being pushed away from us by capitalist forces. That's my answer. I hope that's okay.
Thank you. Abdullah, your hand is still up, I assume.
Hello. Yeah, thanks for this. This is really interesting, and I look forward to reading your book, Alfie. I do kind of somewhat resonant research, mainly centering on tech for development in South Asia. And I spent quite a bit of time doing research with people in the commercial publicity industry, and spoke to them about how they theorized, I guess, in a sense, this nudge, this encounter. So I was wondering whether you might flesh out in a bit more detail, perhaps, how you theorized this nudge, because you kind of, having not read the book, of course, like you figured this substantial epochal shift in the way that kind of like our desires are mediated by I don't know, various kind of like technical apparatuses and stuff. But then, of course, we know that, since the establishment of the administrative state, the data has been collected on us, and kind of political interventions have been designed around that. So yeah, I wondered whether you might go into a bit more detail about this nudge. Is it something aesthetic? Because there's something interesting about how in affect theory, in affect studies, people talk about this quite a lot. How the way that the thing that differentiates a nudge that doesn't work and one that does work is the way that sometimes it feels as if it's speaking to you directly, but also simultaneously speaking to everyone else directly as well. And in that sense, also kind of like builds a certain register of kind of self-knowledge as well. And then there's also the moment where sometimes you don't identify with the way that you're represented. I mean, I think you join TikTok, right? And immediately it gives you an extremely effective feed of things that like you have some kind of secret, quiet interest in. And there's like a tense relationship to that. So I was wondering how you kind of think about these kinds of things, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it does. Like your question is more about like how does this technology actually work on us? Like how can a nudge be effective? Is that right? Like, oh, hang on, what's going on? Yeah, like what makes it work? Yeah, okay. So I see what you're asking. I do. When it's like, do you want to buy this T-shirt or something? Then yeah, like I see where the question comes in. It has to sort of activate your desire in a certain way for you to actually do that. And I think the way you put it is really right. That part of that desire. Actually, I do have a lot of answers. This is a great question. Part of that is okay. And here's something quite wild. I'm just going to quickly say it and then go to an actual answer. One of the things I really think, and it's actually something I've sought. It's part of the book when I was writing about virtual reality pornography. But actually think it's subsequently I've realized it's more important than I thought, because what I was trying to think about was a kind of ventriloquism of desire, right? So basically when you're doing it because someone else would want to do it. So like a lot of pornography functions this way, right? So like you don't actually want to do these things, but you want to do them. So you get to experience someone else's desire in the act of it. And I just put that in the porn thing, but I also think it relates to advertising and targeted advertising in a much broader way. Like, do you want to buy this T-shirt? It's also the imaginary somebody else wants to buy this T-shirt. But this isn't that radical to say, because what after all, what is if there's a sign that says only 5 left, that surely means you're invited to be. If you're not interested in the item until you see the sign that says only 5 left, it's your desire saying, I can actually desire that like the other people who could desire it. And this is critical part of desire in life, not in digital world. This is how psychoanalysis can help to understand desire, that a lot of what you desire is not yours, but a kind of mimicry of someone else's desire. But when the digital world tries to realizes that and tries to offer it to you, it does totally transform things. You could think about that in the sense of the Trump election. I could see someone saying it was a good question. It was a good question. Like, how do we get nudged to vote for Brexit, for example? And it is because of this. If you look at the Brexit campaign, I don't know if you were in England at all, but like, it was always like, look how many people want Brexit. Don't you want to join them? That was the thing. Like, but nobody wanted Brexit. Like, when it came, it was like, what even is it? Nobody even. Now it's like, what do we now need? But what functions is this idea that you can desire what you've been allowed to desire. You're presented with the opportunity to desire, and you take it. So, and that is how advertising works. And yeah, you're absolutely right. And as is this question in the chat about governments. These companies, like, most of this is about targeted advertising and so on. But there are companies, they're called like data-driven solution systems, who specifically use exactly the same kind of data-driven technologies to ensure that a democratic outcome is arrived at in a certain election or so on, in whatever country that's going on, or whatever level that's going on. So, absolutely, this kind of nudging, so that's part of the answer. And the second part is, it's not always like, you don't really have to always want it in order to do it. Like, this is another thing, like, sometimes it's you're talking about just a click, right? So it doesn't have to be like this proper, like, full psychoanalysis for like, how did my desire get so powerfully co-opted, but like more like, how did I just get encouraged to click that? And at that level, it can and sometimes it's automated, like with Netflix and so on. And we've got an interesting article in this Sublation magazine coming out this week about Netflix, and how that you can just kind of seamlessly move from watching one to another. It's by this Korean Marxist, and that I mentioned earlier, and so sometimes all this talk of desire that I'm guilty of myself, it can make things seem like more powerful than they are. Like, I'm sure when I'm talking about your Trump supporter, you've got in your head someone with a hat, the MAGA hat, that's got the sign that's storming the White House or whatever. But really, it can come down to much less powerful forms of desire, much more like clicks, or even passively allowing Amazon Prime to play the next show when the last episode of your show is finished. This is also a form of desire, right? And a form of nudging. It's not that you were turned into a passionate, desiring subject, but that you just simply decided to allow that show to play. And that already you're in this desiring machine of capitalism when that happens, I suppose. I don't know, that sounds bad. But,
so
it is mad.
Our two written in questions now. Go to Jurassica first because she hasn't spoken yet. Her question is, any ideas, examples of ways to reclaim collectively?
Oh yeah. And I meant to I was gonna talk about that earlier before I sort of rambled myself out of it. But it was really interesting when in the UK, Jeremy Corbyn's potential Labour government suggested a state-owned, state-run free Wi-Fi, and everyone kind of reacted with this mad kind of fear of the state, and this goes back to the Marxism of all this, I suppose. Everyone was saying, oh my God, these communists are going to be controlling our brains through our Wi-Fi if we get Jeremy Corbyn gets to own the Wi-Fi and give it to us for free. But we've got no problem whatsoever with letting corporations do exactly the same thing, right? So suddenly we become aware of it. And this is one of the big things that, so to answer the question directly, in the book, I proposed like 3 different ways in which we could use technology to do our job instead of the job of the platform capitalists or whoever they are. Like, I proposed a socialist dating site. I can't explain it right now. I proposed a virtual reality video game that would, I don't know, it was kind of like Me Too the game or something, kind of like a socialist approach to gender politics and dating. And I also proposed like a wearable, like a Fitbit or something, like a wrist wearable that would monitor workers and sort of punish their employers for like health like fluctuations in the worker's stability. But in a way, these were like half joking, as I said before, half joking suggestions about how we could reclaim collectively these outsourced desires, as your question is, Jurassica. But they were not just jokes or playful, but also just this kind of idea that it's still a kind of open field, and also we don't need so much to reclaim it. This is the problem, as what I was saying before. Like, the technology is there to do the good stuff with it. Like the internet and digital technology should be our ally, right? It's only because of ownership models and because of property and capitalism that it is not working for us, but it is working for those who own it, which is this kind of 1% of society that run our society, right? So we're not short of ideas of what to do with the technology. We're short of power to do it with. And when you get somebody like Jeremy Corbyn suggesting a state-owned Wi-Fi, we should be jumping at that and saying this is the start, but instead we're saying, oh my God, don't trust the state. We've got to actually trust Zuckerberg instead, which is, so I think the very first step is convincing people that because people honestly don't realize, even to this day, how much, they're being, and it's boring to say, it's been said and it's been said and it's been said. People don't realize to this day just how much they're being monitored, recorded, and sold. So first step is to realize that. The second step is to create a situation where we'd rather have that power ourselves than just hand it over to corporations. And then we can start thinking about what to do with the technologies. Okay, there is another question.
Yes, there's also Carol Ann's, but we'll go back to you, Carol Ann. As Lisa's asking hers for the first time. How do you relate this push to the de facto definition of health and well-being as quite the opposite, serving profit and the status quo and the vaccine response during the pandemic?
Okay. Again, I don't want to sort of put you off everything I've said. I've said by saying something wild, but I find the vaccine thing an absolutely disgrace. I mean, look, just to be clear, I have had my vaccines, so I'm not an anti-vaxxer. However, I think the sort of polarization around this stuff has been like devastating to the left, and I don't know if the implication of the question is that hang on, let me have a look.
I'm here.
Yeah, maybe clarify the question.
I'm here. Hi.
Yeah, hi, Lisa.
and thanks. What you're saying is somewhat new to me, so I'm really appreciating. I hear your passion, and it's just really rich for me because I work in educational systems change, and it's such a huge lever, and I have a very long view. So what I see is a disconnect from the value of life and the preciousness of life. And as long as we are not connected to that balance and evolution, we are disempowered, and we keep these feedback loops continuing. And so I also think of, how recent humans are in the evolution of the world. And so it was only with Australopithecus that people stood on two legs and used tools. And at that same time, language burst, and people started to see that they needed to organize in social groups to survive. And that's not, now things are just so sped up because of technology, and the pandemic has pushed it. We're never going back to education as we did in brick and mortar the same way. And that's a good thing too, because I taught K-12 English as a new language and other subjects. And I really saw how schools inflict a lot of trauma and inefficiency. And I see it now in other systems. So this lack of connection to ourselves as nature, mm-hmm. and the holism that promises that young children have that, and they're very sensitively aware. So my question is around not only the vaccine, like as an example of how this has sped up the division and the confusion around the value of life and community.
Yeah, no, I get it. Can you just quickly say why you can? What do you think the vaccine response kind of shows that? Do you mean the kind of polarization of people?
Yeah. So I speak with lots of people in Europe, and just like in the U.S., we are divided between right and left, Republican, Democrat. A friend of mine in Europe, her mother is a holistic physician. She comes from a long line of holistic physicians in Germany. Her brother works for a drug company that sells the vaccine, and the mother is no longer speaking to the son. And this woman, when I told her that I was vaccinated, she looked at me like, I have friends in Europe that look at me like, what, are you nuts? You know, looking for like some third third limb coming off me, because they're so distrustful of that as a health choice. So I guess balancing health choices is deeply personal and needs a lot more information. I realized I was so in fear. My husband is a CEO for a nonprofit nursing home, so we were living this all the time. I was so in fear of becoming ill that I just, as soon as I could get a vaccine, I got it. I realized I never did any research into what my options between the vaccines were. So this showed me this point about health being so personal and now so politicized.
Yeah, absolutely. No, so I've understood now. And that is kind of what I was instinctively getting at, that, like, you know, I wasn't exactly on the fence with the vaccine, but part of it, I'll just be totally honest, part of me wanted to not have it just because, even though thinking of the sort of science and so on, my position is it's right to have it. But part of me wanted to not have it just because it would allow me to have solidarity with the people who hadn't had it. Because the society was trying to tell me, you're either vaccinated or you're not. You know, you're an anti-vaxxer or you're just conforming to the old state's ideas of health, you know? And so I had a strange part of my desire, which was telling me, don't do it just so that you can be, not be part of that, or so that you can retain your connection to everyone, so absolutely, I think this whole question of sort of what's happened with, and it's not specific to the pandemic, it's also, as you said, it's Republicans and Democrats, it's Brexit or not Brexit, it's the way in which, the discourse of our society is structured around dividing people from each other instead of a sense of community and so on. So, I probably don't share your sort of long history of human evolution, but I do share the sort of main point in full, really, that the greatest problem that we've got now is, and I think this goes to what does it mean to be Marxist or, whatever we think of ourselves as. The greatest problem we've got to overcome is thinking of how to build solidarity in a society which is determined to divide us. I mean, if you look at the relationship, this also is a controversial example. If we look at the relationship between second wave feminists and trans activists, for example, which is absolutely fraught, where basically you've got like enormous warfare on, of people on both sides cancelling each other for having the wrong views about trans rights, when these two groups of people should absolutely be allied and working towards the same kind of agenda, and this is how our society tries to divide us, and the things we've got to overcome to have a sense of community and so on. So I totally agree with all that.
Yeah. And so I guess that's my point. Working with youth, there's a lot, we're seeing that the richness is in the continuum between these two polarities, and it's the generative polarities that I'm interested in. And I think young people and trans people especially are waking us up to, and voices that have been muted, indigenous people of color, are waking us up to so much knowledge, wisdom, and perspective that's really necessary to get us out of this feedback loop. So I'm just curious how you suggest conversing with folks, like creating enough safety. You the reason I asked you to please slow down, Alfie, is not only because the content is so rich and the vocabulary is new to me, but I used to advocate for English language learners at my state board of education that insisted on testing kids, even when they didn't have the proficiency to take the test. I was so impassioned that I just came off as a crazy lady because they couldn't hear me. So I'm looking like, and slowing down, you know, the pace is a symptom of trauma. That was my question before about disintegrated loss, failed mourning, that capitalism, I'm not sure I'm a Marxist, but my great-grandfather was in Russia. This slowing down, the quick pace is what capitalism creates.
Oh, I don't think that, but
no? Oh, tell me. I'll listen now.
You know, I read these books like The Slow Professor by that guy. I think it's you know that book, The Slow Professor. I can't remember who it's by now. But it's about Maggie Berg, that's it. You know, I hear these arguments all the time about the pace and speed and so on. You know, I think that the internet generation will think differently, and I actually think that people saying we should slow down is basically boomers trying to hold on to power from a millennial generation that can think in a different way. So, you know, I don't know. I feel torn about that. Like, I don't, and slowing down is also connected with nostalgia and nature and things like that, which are not things I value. So, like, I don't want to go back to a technological society which is sort of more relaxed, more peaceful. These are not like things that I value. Like, I'd rather go into a kind of quick fire future with you know, I'm not saying something like accelerationism, just that, like, I don't trust the arguments for the slowing down pace, you know.
That's super interesting because the mental illness is really high in schools right now, and kids feel crushed. I'd love to talk more with you about this. Yeah.
Yeah, no, I mean, like, my daughter is, I'm always saying, I also find myself saying to my daughter to slow down, and she finds me frustrating for saying that. And I've also thought about, you know, is this capitalism or is this just the way she thinks, you know, because she's extremely proficient with certain kinds of thinking in a way that I wasn't, and I've got kind of used to that now. But yeah, I'm unsure, and I would like to talk about it more. So let's talk about it more.
I'll reach out to you. Yeah, thanks.
So Alfie, you said you're coming to New York in about a month, right?
Yeah, I'll be there on exactly a month, really. 25th of June for a week or so.
So have you done any thinking about the relationship of all these smart buildings to gaming out our eroticism, gaming out our intimacy, all this other, but if you come here, I don't know if you've been to Hudson Yards, almost all the buildings are these smart buildings. Where to get in, you have to pass some type of, you know, you have to definitely have a meeting with someone, all kinds of things, but then you're given something to go through the building by which you're monitored. And as I went to the Google office where I was talking with Google about of all kinds of shit you're talking about today. They knew when my meeting was over, and when I stepped into the elevator lobby, there was a voice that came through the lobby telling me what elevator to take. And there are no buttons in the elevators. You get in and it takes you to where you are going. Now, that was an experience I had for the first time 3 or 4 years ago, but now it is pervasive in all these new towers in New York. And now I'm sure it's maybe it's not in that Match.com building where I think that's the ugly building right where the Hudson River bows out a little bit.
Yeah, that's it. Yeah, it's really ugly. Yeah,
one of the uglier buildings of the many ugly buildings that are destroying the view of.
It looks like a sort of Ibiza hotel.
Yes.
White. Yeah.
and totally incongruous to everything else around it. But when you go to Hudson Yards, you'll see the same thing. And I'm not advocating a trip there so much, but just to have the experience of how, but because you had been in China, I thought you may have been in buildings like this. They are another aspect. Our environments are very controlled like this now. And at Hudson Yards, all these vast lobbies are being monitored in the same way. You feel like it's the nice police state. There's no real guards with big guns around, even though there are guards with three-piece suits with some heavy-duty weapon in there, because they're dealing with guarding whoever's running Google and the other corporations that have located there. But it is, to me, I still think that this is technology we built that can be repurposed. Same with all this gaming out of the nudging, can be redone in a way that is for reducing our labor time. And even though all of capital is based on us all working way more than we need to, but these kinds of things can lead to political demands around reducing the work week and things like that. But it's working the opposite way most times as it is. But didn't really ask a question. I was just putting some stuff up.
No, I was really interested to hear that. I mean, I would like to go to one of these buildings. I mean, I have to say, it's interesting to talk about it. So I haven't been to New York since 2017, and these this doesn't really happen. I mean, so yes, this kind of automated elevators and stuff. I think they had some things like that in like some of the very richest buildings in Hong Kong, but it's very unusual. So I don't know. I haven't seen it become normalized, and that's an important step, I think, because a lot of the time, technologies, and so I really want to experience that when I go to New York. A lot of the time, the technologies we read about and that are all over our media that we're being told to focus on are actually never become normalized, right? So, I mean, virtual reality is the metaverse, is a pile of shit. Like, if you go in the metaverse or whatever, you can just see it's just basically a guy. It's like the end of the Wizard of Oz, where you just get there and it's like, oh, it's just a guy, So, a lot of the things we're told to think about as the sort of pioneer, or also another example of that would be Sophia the robot, who Hanson Robotics made, which was a Hong Kong company, but I think it was bought by a New York one, or it was a New Yorker who set up a Hong Kong company. That's the one.
Yeah, something like that.
Yeah. But the point is, a lot of the things you're told to focus on are, and told to think of the future of technology are still science fiction. But what's really important is the everyday things that are changing your experience of the city, of your life in an everyday way. So, the elevator you described, Deliveroo, Uber Eats, Pokemon Go, these are more powerful than robots flying around or, whatever that is, because those are the things that's transforming what it means to be a human being in capitalism, And so I want to experience what you described, because I think we should focus on those things as things to study,
Well, I really experienced it in a different way when an older building had a semi-smart elevator put in, let's say, where when you checked in at the front counter, you were told what elevator to take when you went through the protective electronic guide into the lobby. And there was only that to it. But as it was being installed, the people that were like 35 and younger didn't bat an eyelash at anything during all these transitions of these buildings. And I see the old people like me are looking must be looking at this in much the same way that I did as a teenager when people hit the moon, kind of thing.
Yeah.
But the changes are so profound. And I don't think that we as a working class movement have a clue as to how profound they are. I think you do, but as it's not penetrated the movement at all. I don't know.
No, well, I mean, yeah. I mean, I suppose it will, because eventually so many of workers will be working for these corporations that it will have to. But yeah, the quicker we can sort of get onto that, the better, I guess. But yeah, it's been really nice to to chat about it all. I mean,